In a Saturday Review interview published on Christmas Day 1971, Stanley Kubrick said, "I have always enjoyed dealing with a slightly surrealistic situation and presenting it in a realistic manner. I've always liked fairy tales and myths, magical stories, supernatural stories, ghost stories, surrealistic and allegorical stories." Kubrick Country with Penelope Houston. This fascination is especially evident in Eyes Wide Shut, perhaps more than in any of his other films, with its multitude of mythical allusions. Modern-day Disney-like versions of fairy tales usually end with, "and they lived happily ever after." But many of these tales originated as grim and macabre stories. In the context of Bill's psychosexual issues, even the phrase, "happy ending," carries a loaded meaning, slang for a prostitute bringing a client to climax at a massage parlor. The ending of Eyes Wide Shut evokes both this and Bill's sexual frustration. Just as he goes through the story without ever actually having sex, the film ends on a note many found overly ambiguous and inconclusive. Some, like Martin Scorsese, saw it as uplifting, a story of a husband and wife growing closer through emotional intimacy. Others thought it cynical, even tragic. A tale of two people who begin with their eyes wide shut and end the same way, having learned nothing. The final dialogue between Bill and Alice underscores this tension.
And no dream is ever just a dream.
The important thing is we're awake now. And hopefully for a long time to come.
Forever.
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 Let's not use that word. You know, it frightens me.
This reads almost as a mockery of the happily ever after cliché. And then Eyes Wide Shut closes with one of the boldest last lines in cinema.
And you know, there is something very important that we need to do as soon as possible.
What's that?
Fuck.
Kubrick's last word. In the article Introducing Sociology, Tim Kreider described Eyes Wide Shut as a savage critique of yuppie marriage, writing that Alice and Bill casually pimp their own little angel out to the world of commerce, with an ending suggesting that the Harford's daughter is just as they've resigned themselves to being.
Fuck.
While the film fits the template of a slipstream dream narrative, it can also be read as satire, a sardonic look at an upper-middle-class couple's misguided attempts to break into the freakish ruling class. Yet years later, Kreider softened his view, adding an afterword that framed the film more positively, as a film about intimate, domestic life, about a blindly complacent but basically happy marriage, testing its fault lines of temptation, jealousy, and resentment, and leaving it stronger and more truthful. One particular detail in the ending has become the focus of extensive debate. Two men at Ziegler's party, sitting at a table beneath a statue of Cupid and Psyche, by the staircase Bill ascends with Ziegler's butler, appear again in the toy shop. We never see them very clearly or for very long in either scene, but they seem to be the same men. Both wear black suits, one has glasses, and both are bald with grey hair, archetypal wealthy old men. In the store, they linger inconspicuously in the background while Bill and Alice talk when Helena suddenly seems to follow them behind a rack. The moment is fleeting, lost amid the hustle and bustle of the store, but it strongly suggests that the same two men from Ziegler's party are leading Helena away. Helena vanishes just after Bill and Alice pat her on the back, almost as if encouraging her to go with the men. She looks up at her father, and both he and Alice casually rub her back mid-conversation before looking down at her. Then she moves toward the two men. Bill glances back at Alice, and Alice turns her head toward Helena as if giving her one last look. Helena glances back at Alice, almost questioningly, as if to ask, "Are you sure I should go this way?" And Bill and Alice silently affirm, "Yes, darling, go with those men. This is the path forward." Then they watch her go. But before we see whether Helena actually follows the men all the way around the corner, the camera cuts back to close-ups of Bill and Alice's faces, leaving her fate ambiguous. At that moment, a shelf of stuffed tiger dolls is visible just behind Alice, the same kind of tiger seen earlier on Domino's bed. The tiger and leopard print motif, long a staple in women's fashion, carries a loaded symbolism of exoticism and sexualization. The question is chilling. Are Bill and Alice so blind to the predatory powers of the wealthy that they do not notice their daughter's abduction? Or are they knowingly complicit, sacrificing Helena to the cult as a price of admission, echoing the theme of Rosemary's Baby, where a child is offered to the devil in exchange for status and security? They appear oblivious, resigned, or even quietly supportive of Helena's departure with these men, henchmen of the ultra-wealthy elite. The implications ripple outward. Connections to systemic child abuse scandals in the Catholic Church, conspiracy theories about global elites running child trafficking networks, whispers of satanic ritual sacrifice. In this reading, the ending becomes very dark indeed. After all they have endured, Bill and Alice ultimately give up their daughter to the upper echelon sex cult as the price of acceptance, retreating into their own shallow relief that they can still fuck. Is Eyes Wide Shut ultimately a horror story? A savage condemnation of capitalism? A scathing satire of the amorality of the ruling class? I am struggling with this idea, but it does seem to apply to what was happening with Stanley Kubrick and his daughter Vivian around the time Eyes Wide Shut was going into production. She had become estranged from the family, drawn into Scientology. Perhaps Kubrick is suggesting that he and his wife, like Bill and Alice, were so preoccupied with their own lives that they barely noticed their daughter being led dangerously astray, or else felt powerless to prevent it. If the names Helena, Sabrina, and Carlota are deliberate references, what might they mean? When Helena says,
I could put Sabrina in here.
Could she be referring to placing John Milton's comus character Sabrina into the demonic baby carriage from Rosemary's Baby? If so, is Helena unconsciously recognizing herself and her parents as inevitable victims of rich and powerful men? In effect saying, I can sacrifice the female spirit who protects feminine virtue from abuse by predatory men by putting her into this demon carriage, and in doing so, I gain access to elite status. She performs this ritual without awareness, repeating cultural patterns that have infected her. Barbie dolls, tiger-patterned stuffed animals, Disney fairy tales, the savior prince. Bill and Alice teach her these things because they were taught them as well. Alice, the archetypal beautiful bored housewife with her wealthy doctor husband, flirts with older men at decadent parties. Bill indulges his old boys' club desires, the scotch, the prostitutes, his nostalgic connection to his college buddy. They're all trying to live out versions of themselves invented by advertisers to sell products. They are the toys in the toy shop. It is a bleak examination of the worst aspects of human nature, the capitalist manifesto played out in miniature. And yet, on the other hand, very little of what we see in this film may be real. With this in mind, I lean toward reading the ending as genuinely happy, an alternately ironic and sincere satirical and dramatic adult Christmas movie. An unlikely fairy tale. Bill and Alice pat Helena on the back as if to reassure her that everything is fine, that the two men do not exist outside of their minds, and that she is safe. In this interpretation, they have learned that evil is an illusion that only exists within themselves. By facing it, they have stripped it of its power. There is no film credit for the actors playing the two mysterious men. No evidence, not a trace that they exist. They are first seen sitting by a winged statue, and Helena wears fairy wings. Could they all be spirits? What if the men are not sinister agents at all, but kindly guardians in the tradition of It's a Wonderful Life? That story, too, is about an angel at Christmas time helping a man appreciate his life by showing him a dark alternate reality. Perhaps these doubled old men are closer to Clarence the Angel in It's a Wonderful Life, or the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future in A Christmas Carol. In this reading, it becomes Helena's turn to confront alternate versions of herself, Ilona, Domino, Milich's daughter, as a way of being warned, so she might avoid the fate of succumbing to misogyny and instead wake up, just as her parents finally have. Perhaps the twin old men are present at the end not to abduct her, but to watch over her, just as they may have watched over Bill and Alice at Ziegler's party to ensure that neither actually cheated. Bill and Alice now realize the secret society was never real, and because of this realization, it no longer has power over them. And then there is Alice's dream, a dream within a dream, through the looking glass, the Wizard of Oz. The dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Much of the film implies that the narrative events are not happening as shown, but are largely figments of Bill's imagination, projections from the unconscious, the Jungian shadow. But when do the dream sequences begin and end? There is no clear line between fantasy and reality in Eyes Wide Shut, which is partly why the film remains so puzzling. As far as we know, the Harfords are fine in the end, are they not? Perhaps better off than when they began. It is just a toy baby carriage, just a doll, just a dream. Bill and Alice share a kind of intimacy they may not have experienced in years, if ever. They tell each other the truth. Neither of them actually cheated. They are alive, wealthy, and together. The threat is gone, if it ever truly existed. Maybe the twin old men symbolize both the good and bad qualities of patriarchy, how men can both care for and oppress women, embodying the worst evils of corruption and abuse, alongside the protective strength of fatherly or husbandly guidance. How can we be sure about the ending, or what is real at all? We cannot. And that is the essence of Kubrick. His films are exasperating and illuminating, but ultimately transformative. They are works of art that force us to explore the deepest recesses of our own hearts and minds in search of meaning. Some Kubrick scholars insist that the recurrence of the two men is nothing more than the reuse of background extras to save production costs, with no narrative significance. Yet these same scholars emphasize Kubrick's meticulous attention to detail, arguing that nothing in his films is accidental, that every frame is deliberate and loaded with meaning. So how do we reconcile this? After all, we have the Cupid greeting card, the Eros sign, the men seated beneath a winged Cupid statue, Helena wearing fairy wings, and all three figures appearing together at the end. If we accept this as mere oversight on Kubrick's part, then what other symbolic and metaphorical elements should we dismiss as accidents? That would mean Kubrick was not the thorough, calculating filmmaker his reputation suggests. Or perhaps he once was, but by the time of Eyes Wide Shut, he was old, weary, and careless. But no one wants to admit this. It is easier to maintain the myth of genius, of individuals throughout history whose brilliance embodies the highest potential of humanity, offering hope in an otherwise dark and indifferent world. And so we search for meaning. The movie begins and ends with Alice. Although Bill is the protagonist, Alice is the catalyst for his journey towards self-discovery and awareness, signaling an unstable masculinity and the rise of femininity within a male-dominated society. The opening shot is of Alice naked, undressing, her back to the camera in a medium shot, objectified. The closing shot is a close-up of her face, teary-eyed, expressionless, without makeup and wearing glasses, humanized. This shift epitomizes Bill's journey and ours as the audience, moving from viewing woman as an object to viewing her as a person. It is progress. Bill begins in denial, naive about his wife's sexual desires as well as his own. But as Alice says, now that they are awake, they can finally, in a more intimate way than ever before, fuck. In other words, acknowledging fantasies allows for deeper and more meaningful connection with a partner in reality, rather than leaving those fantasies unspoken, where they may only briefly, superficially fulfill, or worse, become destructive if pursued blindly. The quest for wealth is a terrible lie born of unacknowledged insecurity. But to explore one's dark side, the shadow, through the mirror of a spouse, and thus confront oneself, can lead to overcoming fear and temptation and allow for a more honest, fuller life. Perhaps it is a hopeful ending after all, suggesting that evil is an illusion. Seeking material wealth and power over others is what is truly evil, and recognizing this truth liberates us from the demonic forces, real or imagined, that dance both inside and outside of us. Is there even a difference between what is inside and outside? Russian filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky's science fiction epic Solaris, 1972, adapted from Stanislaw Lem's 1961 novel, has often been compared to Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, but it also connects to Eyes Wide Shut. The story takes place on a space station orbiting Solaris, a planet covered entirely by ocean, which scientists believe to be an intelligent sentient being. One day, the cosmonaut protagonist finds his wife dead for 10 years, alive in his quarters. She is not a hallucination, but rather a living embodiment of his memory of her. Solaris has probed his consciousness and manifested a physical replica of his deepest psychic imprint as an attempt at communication. Just as Eyes Wide Shut presents Bill confronting figures born of his dream consciousness, Solaris explores the idea that everyone we encounter is ultimately a reflection of ourselves. An artist's model I know once claimed that every painting she posed for looked like an amalgamation of her and the painter. Eyes Wide Shut is, at its core, about perception. Kubrick is grappling with the greatest weapon wielded by the ruling class, fear. The things we fear most do not truly exist, unless we fear them. This paradox lies in the film's very title. It resists explanation in words. Kubrick himself said that a movie is an experience that directly penetrates the subconscious with an emotional and philosophic content. Eyes Wide Shut is a dream movie, an old-fashioned fairy tale, an alternative Christmas story, a satirical love story, and with its depictions of sexual exploitation and capitalist decadence, it is both a horror film and an anti-horror film, in the sense that there is much to fear, but only if you fear it. Only if you seek it out, blindly, in denial. There is nothing to be afraid of except yourself. This is both comforting and terrifying. As the saying goes, we do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. Or, put another way, we see what we want to see. Stanley Kubrick had wanted to make a film about sex since the early 1960s. Biographer John Baxter notes that Kubrick considered directing a pornographic film based on Blue Movie, a satirical novel by Dr. Strangelove co-screenwriter Terry Southern, about a director who creates Hollywood's first big-budget studio pornographic film. While Kubrick liked the idea, he ultimately concluded he did not have the temperament to research the pornography industry. Southern even described him as too ultra-conservative to pursue it. Kubrick's body of work spans a wide range of genres: science fiction, crime films, historical epics, horror, comedy, political satire, and war films. At one point, it was even rumored that he conceived of artificial intelligence as a children's movie. Given his broad interests, the notion of Kubrick wanting to make a big-budget pornographic film under studio conditions is not far-fetched. In many ways, Eyes Wide Shut might be exactly that, but more accurately a satire of pornography. Tom Cruise's character repeatedly faces sexual propositions in increasingly absurd, illogical contexts, reminiscent of pornography, but crucially, without ever actually having sex. Every Kubrick film contains at least one killing, and the sexual abuse of women or girls is central to several of his works. Because of this, he has often been accused of glorifying violence and misogyny. But Kubrick was less interested in celebrating brutality than in exploring the dark recesses of human nature, often with a cynical edge, but for the sake of intellectual provocation rather than sadistic revelry, as some detractors claim. Satire depends on exaggerating lies in order to expose the truth. Kubrick's critics often overlook that he was an artist, not merely an entertainer. He probed existential extremes so that audiences could confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. We may not like what he reveals, but it is there. From my perspective, Eyes Wide Shut puts forward a thoroughly feminist, anti-capitalist critique, exposing the abuse of women as directly intertwined with the abuse of wealth and power. Beyond his artistry, Kubrick was also a master promoter of his films. His legendary attention to detail and obsessive work ethic extended to every stage of production, including advertising. He devised formulas that allowed him to assure major studio backers that his films would turn a profit. His strategy included controlling poster designs, selecting the precise locations for their display, and calculating mathematically the number and distribution of theaters in which his films should premiere. As a result, Kubrick's movies always made money, even when early reviews were unfavorable, only to be re-evaluated years later as masterpieces and staples of critics' greatest films lists. A tireless researcher, Kubrick's comprehensive oversight of every aspect of his films has rarely, if ever, been matched by another director. He took as much time as he deemed necessary for each project, especially his later works. He secured the rights to Trom novelle in 1968, though friends and collaborators say he had read the novella about 15 years earlier, meaning he had been conceptualizing and working on the film in some form for nearly 50 years. That makes Eyes Wide Shut his richest and most intricately layered work. Kubrick spent decades developing the screenplay and roughly 5 years on pre-production, production, and post-production. The shoot itself lasted 400 days, earning the Guinness World Record for the longest continuous film shoot in history. Where most directors might be satisfied with 20 takes of a scene, Kubrick sometimes demanded over 100. This practice infamously frustrated his actors. But the result was a kind of cinematic alchemy. His films reach a strange, elevated plane of discovery, operating on a symbolic, non-literal frequency. Eyes Wide Shut, like most of Stanley Kubrick's films, demands repeated viewings. Each return reveals new depths, so much so that it can feel like an entirely different movie every time. In some respects, Tim Kreider's initial conclusion that Bill, Alice, and their daughter are fucked by the ruling superpowers who control them and every aspect of life seems both insightful and accurate. Read this way, the ending is thoroughly cynical. They are slaves to the wealthy elite, playthings who may aspire to ownership but remain trapped as mid-level servants, imprisoned within images of themselves and each other sold to them by capitalism, particularly regarding their sexuality. But with repeated viewings, a more positive and uplifting message emerges. While it may be true that the Harfords are manipulated by the ultra-wealthy, treated as servants and sexual objects, despite all the psychological, political, and biological influences weighing on them, a couple can still work it out. Even in the face of dangerous emotions, temptations, and dark paths, particularly Bill's descent, they arrive at honesty. Alice initiates this by telling the truth, and Bill responds in kind. Through open emotional expression, together they overcome the darkest, most powerful forces of evil, both within humanity and within themselves. Perhaps that is what marriage, intimacy, and love are really about. As Alice says at the end, we're awake now. And so, while they may remain metaphorically fucked as man and woman caught within capitalism, they can also unfuck themselves literally through sex in a deeper and more truthful way than ever before. In this way, Eyes Wide Shut encapsulates the paradoxes of humanity in its multi-layered visual and narrative fabric, centered on one of the most difficult yet essential aspects of existence: relationships. We are all characters in each other's dream consciousnesses. As the saying goes, it's not you, it's me. What is real and what is a dream? Eyes Wide Shut. The title itself is the thesis. It describes both the film and the audience. We watch but do not see. We see with our eyes but do not understand. Or, because so much of Kubrick's detail registers subliminally, we are seeing but not with our eyes. It recalls the old joke, "I see," said the blind man. "I hear you," said the deaf man. And the mute man said nothing at all. Jokes aside, that is why this film is so bewildering. It is like a Mobius strip, an M.C. Escher drawing, a Rube Goldberg machine, a fractal puzzle of infinite, interwoven, intertextual dimensions. Kubrick's finest works are labyrinthine maps charting human absurdity, probing the boundaries of existence: war, violence, sex, time, space. You know, the small stuff. Eyes Wide Shut is a film of vast scope and depth, relentless in its examination of how evolution, history, politics, and art shape our dreams, perceptions, sexuality, and relationships. Kubrick presents the theater of the mythic, where fabulous inventions reflect our own darkest potential. He penetrates the psyche with illusion, drawing ancient archetypes into the banality of the present. He did not make films to entertain passively, but to be dissected, debated, and wrestled with. As such, Eyes Wide Shut endures, and as Kubrick himself proclaimed shortly before his death, it stands as his greatest work.